Imagine expanding your team's abilities without adding headcount. At Element 451, AI assistants like admissions advisors and student success coaches work alongside your staff to deliver personalized experiences at scale, offer round the clock support, and uncover data driven insights. It's not just about doing more, it's about doing it smarter. Elevate your team with an AI workforce that delivers personalized, scalable, and impactful experiences across the student lifecycle. Learn more at element451.com. Hi, I'm a former higher ed CMO, and I have a confession to make. Despite being a huge advocate for using AI and marketing communications work in higher education, I am really concerned that AI use could end up being the Wild West if we are not intentional about how we implement it. I am sadly old enough to remember when university websites were first coming on the scene and it was truly a free for all. Social media followed that same pattern, and higher ed marketing and communications leaders have spent years untangling that mess. For today's conversation, I'm sitting down with Nikki Ferrell, who's the Associate Director of Online Enrollment Marketing and Communications at Miami University. She is chairing a cross-departmental AI steering committee that's focused on research, policy, principles, and education. Inspired by her graduate work in composition and rhetoric, she champions ethical, transparent, and inclusive AI adoption across teams by fostering open dialogue, thoughtful experimentation, and ongoing learning. Nikki's current focus is on expanding staff training and educational resources to ensure Miami's marketing practices evolve responsibly alongside the technology. I hope you enjoy this episode. You're listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO, the podcast where marketing minds in higher ed come to pull back the curtain, spill a little tea, and talk honestly about what it takes to market in this industry. I'm Jaime Hunt, the founder of Solve Higher Ed, author of Heart Over Hype, and a former campus CMO who spent more than 2 decades navigating the weird, wonderful world of higher education marketing. This show is for the strategists, the storytellers, the change agents, and anyone who has ever tried to get Faculty Senate on board with a rebrand. Here we get candid about the challenges and share the ideas that are shaping the future of our field. Sound like your kind of conversation? Then let's get into it. I'm so thrilled to be here with Nikki Ferrell. How are you today?
Good. I'm doing great. How are you, Jaime?
I'm great. Welcome to the show. I'm really excited to chat with you about this. I actually was VP at Miami when we hired Nikki, and it's been a really long time since I saw you. I think we ran into each other maybe at an AMA at some point.
We did.
Yeah.
You had an ankle cast.
Right. The AMA where I sprained my ankle.
Yes. So it's definitely cool chatting with you now after you hired me a couple of years ago, and now we've both kind of shifted and moved in good directions.
Yeah. I'm super excited to chat with you about AI because that's something that I'm really passionate about, and I'm really excited that Miami is moving in the direction that it's moving with this. And it sounds like really it's been something you've been spearheading. And one of the things that you sent to me before this was sort of your outline for creating an AI steering committee at Miami. What was there like a moment where you're like, we need this? Like what prompted creating that?
Yeah, there was actually. It's interesting. So I started taking a master's of English program at Miami, and in the first class, we were asked to write a white paper type of report on any topic that we wanted. I was interested in AI, and the professor, who's a fantastic researcher and in leading rhetoric and composition scholar, especially for writing with AI, encouraged that. So I had started looking into using AI in marketing, and it's through writing this report and doing the research, finding the risks and the ways that it can go wrong. I quickly realized that should turn into more of a proposal to say we need an oversight. specifically in the marketing division in Miami. We hadn't made any policies or anything yet, and this was in 2023. So it was right after ChatGPT launched, but it wasn't as nearly as commonly used as it is now. But even then, my research showed that people were using it and experimenting with it at work. And if we didn't, and their employers didn't have rules, they assumed that they were not allowed to use it and therefore wouldn't talk about using it. So that's a huge risk. So I wrote that paper and I took it to Jessica Ravinius, who's the VP of marketing now. And she was super encouraging. She actually approved it before she ever saw the report. But since I had to do the report for my class, I went ahead and gave it to her. And that was how we got started.
I love that. And I love the intentionality because I talk to a lot of institutions that know that there's team members using generative AI in their work, but they haven't really set any guardrails or any like ethical boundaries or where and how we use it. And I really think that leads us to kind of what happened with websites way back in the day, like 25, 30 years ago, social media, where everybody was just kind of doing their own thing and there was no guardrails around any of it. Everybody was just, it's like a free for all. So I hope higher ed has learned from the mistakes of those situations. And it sounds like Miami really recognized the need for that. And I would love to hear about how your steering committee is structured and what you guys set as your early priorities for that committee.
Sure. So first of all, I was very intentional in recruiting folks from across our marketing division. At Miami, we have a centralized marketing division, thanks to Jamie's work a couple of years ago when she was there. And we have photographers and videographers. We have graphic designers, content writers, news writers, enrollment marketing, which I guess that's me, and that's kind of everything. We do a lot of different things. And so it was really important that I had representation from each of those teams because they're all using AI differently if they want to use AI. So that was the first thing. Another thing that was really important to me was to have a skeptic where we have somebody who is cautious about AI. She doesn't think that it's evil or that robots are going to take over the world. I kind of think that robots might take over the world, but she's not on board with that. But she offers us a really great perspective of questioning everything and making sure that when we're thinking about educating our staff about it, that we're taking into account the folks who may not be interested, and we're not forcing anybody to use it or embrace it if that's not something that they're interested in doing. So that's a really good thing. The third thing that I really learned after the first year was we only do 1-year terms for committee members. So you sign up and you agree, you commit to 1 year. At the end of that year, we welcome you to commit to another year, or there's no pressure for you to say, nope, I'd rather not commit to another year, because it takes the pressure off of folks to, when they join the committee, to feel like they're committing to something very long term. It helps with enthusiasm and support on the committee. New members are excited and engaged. And then it also helps expand the folks who have been involved in the committee, who are in the staff. It's about 60 people on our staff total, and we have about 10 committee members. So if we have 20 out of 60 who have served on the committee before, it gets us more buy-in, more support from our team. So those are the ways that I structured the committee.
I love that. I love the idea of having skeptics on it. When I present to like boards or cabinets on like leading this AI revolution, I talk about, those skeptics are not going to go away. You can't just snap your fingers and say, you can't be a skeptic anymore. You have to embrace this. I personally think they do have to embrace this for their career's sake, because I think it's just going to be an essential skill that they need to have. But you can't really set policies or guardrails or really guide how you're using it without having some sort of like naysaying voice in the room. So I love that you really intentionally thought about that. And offline, you're going to have to tell me who it is. I'm wondering if it's somebody I know and if it's who I'm guessing.
It might be. Yeah. And And then, another thing is they, you know, people who are skeptical about it ask the right questions that
Hmm.
may not occur to those of us who are just excited, right? So
Yeah.
I think having that voice is so valuable to make sure that we are being really responsible and thoughtful in how we're adopting AI.
When I was at WSSU, we had this kind of schism in our team where we had folks who were very like, we're charging ahead. We have a new idea and we're doing the idea and we're plowing ahead. And then we had people who were much more analytical, like, let's weigh the pros and cons. And
Hmm.
on their own, the analytical people may have ended up in like analysis paralysis, never made those bold moves. And on their own, those like early adopters, the charging forward, trailblazers were potential, there was potential for them to like make moves that weren't thought out well or didn't have intentionality behind them. But when you blend sort of that whole pot of people together and you get this sort of like, now we're moving at the pace that's probably appropriate, we're
Hmm.
excited, we're charging forward, but we're also doing it with those like questions, concerns, and that intentionality that's needed to make sure you're doing it right.
Correct. Yeah.
I
It's
love that.
it's it's a huge help, and making sure that everyone has a voice too. Nobody gets to shout down the skeptic when they point out something. So so we make sure that everyone's voices are heard and that they're encouraged to give us their thoughts. And even if they think that no one else in the room might agree with them. And that's kind of a tough part too, because you have to get somebody who is willing to speak up when in a
Yeah,
room full of folks who are really excited. So kudos to the skeptics for helping us with that.
I love that. So, what did you guys set as your first priorities as a steering committee?
So the first thing that we did was a lot. I was in the master's program already, so I have been doing research up to my nose for the past couple of years. Doing a part-time program, so it's going to take a while. So research has been really important. And I created for the committee, a whole Google Drive folder of all these academic papers, articles, other resources about AI and ethical AI adoption, as well as policies from other universities, which were very difficult to find at first in 23. The only thing I could find was really about academic integrity, not about staff members using it. But that has changed a lot. So the first thing we wanted to do was create policy. So we went with first mission statement for the committee, then principles for the committee, and the principles for AI use within the university communication and marketing division. And those principles are very high level. We believe that the human touch is always going to be essential, that AI cannot replace humans. And all the way down to things like we believe that part of our purpose here is to foster professional development within our staff so that they can learn, give them opportunities to learn and enhance their careers, through AI or through learning new disruptive technologies. So it has a couple different things in it, and it's actually based on the AI Marketing Institute's manifesto,
Mm,
which is a fantastic. It's a open source. It's on Creative Commons. They encourage institutions to take it and adapt it for their own company. And so we took that and adapted it. So there were some things that obviously didn't apply to us at all as a university or as a university marketing division, but it was a really good place to start when trying to think of what's our big picture here. So that was the first part. And then we moved on to, once we agreed on that and leadership was on board, we moved on to creating policies. So one of our policies is that we do not use AI for any editorial content. So our news team, especially at that time, news, we're following industry best practices, the AP,
hmm
and other major news organizations. They're not, they were not embracing the technology.
hmm
And so for many good reasons. First of all, the trust is essential in journalism. As I was a journalist before, and I know Jaime, you worked in journalism too, didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was huge. So we said, great, fine. And the person on the board, on the committee, who was from the news team, said, I think that we should just say not at all. And we said, okay, great. So your own department might have stricter rules than our policies, but
Mm.
in general, these policies, everyone has to follow at least these policies, but your own department might have stricter ones. So we made those policies, and they also include things like we can use it to edit a photo for an ad only if it doesn't change the nature of the image or the nature or the meaning of the image. But for editorial, we don't use photo editing for editorial images because they're seen as news. So
Mhm.
we don't want to, we would be misrepresenting an editorial photo if we edited it in the same way that if you edit it too much with Photoshop, right?
Right.
So that was the next part. And we shared those and the leadership agreed on it. And so now we're moving into my goal is to just have a fantastic library of resources for staff. So they have to take a little quiz about the policies and the guideline and the principles before they get access to paid ChatGPT.
Oh,
We have a
nice.
gated enterprise membership so that the data is not shared. But they also need to know things like don't share student data even
Mhm.
in this gated system. So they have to they have to read these policies and take a little course about it and take a quiz before they get access to the paid system. And so that was the first little piece. And now we're looking at prompt libraries, a database of use cases, and custom GPTs that we're sharing with each other. And then also doing some live training during staff meetings or during lunch hours to just, I think that the most important thing is that for responsible AI adoption is that your staff is educated and they understand the basics about how AI works so that they can understand better what the risks and the rewards are for it. So we're really focusing on education now.
That's really smart. And I'm curious about how you got buy-in from leadership. How did you approach that?
So, Jessica Rubinius, she was on board right away because she's the best. But we actually had a conversation about it. I think I scheduled time with her to just sit down and chat and say, I'm in this class and we're talking about all these use cases where universities, the university, the Vanderbilt, a college within Vanderbilt University or Vanderbilt University sent out a message about a tragic shooting at another university to students. And the email said, we stand with Michigan University and we are here to support you if you need extra support during this difficult time. And then at the end, it said, this email was created or co-created by ChatGPT. And this was when ChatGPT really first came out. And so it raises so many questions. So it got really bad press. It really affected their brand reputation and I'm sure trust with their constituents. And the questions that arise aren't just should they have not put that line in that email that says it was ChatGPT? Should they have even used ChatGPT in the first place? And then if they do use it, do they say that they're using it? And how transparent should they be about that use? So that was just one of a couple of examples that we chatted about, and I said, I think that we need oversight here, and she was 100% on board. It didn't hurt that I also, gave her a graduate level paper with like a 15-page white paper on it. I don't think that you have to go that far at your university if you're looking for that kind of buy-in. But I think what speaks to our leadership is thinking about what matters to them. So in my marketing division, our mission is to elevate the brand, Miami's brand. And so looking at even go look at your mission statement for your university and see how responsible AI adoption supports that mission. It can be so high level and then it's tough for a leader to say no, that they don't want to do this thing that supports the mission, right? So I think that's a big thing. And do your research and know and be aware of what it is and what it's capable of. And it's not just you adopt AI and everything's great and nobody works anymore. We have realistic expectations about what difference it's going to make. And at first, it's only going for us, it's really only more people are aware of it. And now we talk about it openly. some of us, it's probably saved a lot of time, hours of time. But the majority of the staff members after a year and a half are not at the point where they're saving hours of time a day by using AI, but it's okay. It's slow, it's progressive. And our leadership understands that the benefits that I promised her are being met. I didn't make promises about cut your staff in half or, whatever. Being realistic about what impact it's going to have, I think is important too.
When I imagine that you could use things like Gemini Deep Research or ChatGPT's Deep Research to do some of that scouring of the internet for policies that other institutions have, those use cases where things have gone awry because there haven't been policies. I mean, that's one of the great things to me. That's where there's huge productivity gains, is instead of doing a Google search and then kind of picking your way through all these links, you can ask Google Gemini Deep Research or ChatGPT Deep Research. Those are the ones I use the most. And they can deliver you quickly a list of references with good descriptions of what is in the content. And it saves so much time.
You are I had not thought about that, because when I did this, it was just ChatGPT 1 or 2. It wasn't reliable for research. It didn't, you couldn't have it write more than a paragraph at a time. And even that paragraph was terrible and obviously AI. You're so right. I think that today, if I was asked to do this today, I would use deep research to help get me started and find those use cases and find the risks and help me find variable sources. I mean, in my master's program, I study AI in writing specifically, and we're encouraged to use AI as we write things or as we research things. And it was a huge help in this huge paper I had to do last semester. It was the first time that I used deep research, and I showed my professor I didn't ask it to write a paper. I asked it to help me find sources, and I went ahead and wrote a paper. And I showed it to my professor just to say, like, look this is insane. And I said, what grade would you give this? And she said, by looking at it, she said, I would give it a B. Like,
wow.
In a graduate, one of the top English programs in the country. Like, that's how, and just with a quick scan of it, she said, it's a B paper. And so, yeah, definitely. I think that, as long as you're following responsible AI use, like checking your sources, and because it lied to me a lot when I was doing that research, it still lies, but it would save a ton of time to do it that way instead of the way I did it ancient history 18 months ago or 2 years ago when in 23.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think about like the amount of time I spent in like JSTOR and like the amount of time spent in Google trying to find things. And I'm working with a client on developing a strategy for readmitting students who stopped out before they got their degree. And I was like, there's got to be some examples out there of schools that have done this that can help me think through this strategy. And, I asked Google Deep Research and it came up with some really good examples, and kind of, it's not like I took, oh, this is what this school is doing and this is what I'm going to recommend. But it was like, oh, that school did this kind of unique thing and this one did this kind of unique thing. But I don't even know how I would have looked for all that before Deep Research was on the radar. But you're absolutely right. Check those links. And if any of my students are listening to this, know that I spend a lot of time in these models and I can detect AI papers fairly well. And I think you're like doing yourself a disservice if you're having ChatGPT do your homework for you. Like what's the point of that? You're just paying for the piece of paper at the end of the day versus the knowledge that you get.
We talk about that a lot in our program, in my master's program too, about human machine teaming with writing. And what are you losing when you ask ChatGPT or a large language model to draft your paper to write for you? And it's not just that you're losing the practice of writing a paper, but writing is a form of thinking, right?
Mm-hmm.
We write, when we write things, we understand it better after we're done writing it. And so it's a learning process that you miss out on if you allow AI to do it for you, or if you rely on it too much. And, there's recent research that talks about cognitive decline with folks who are using AI a lot, and that they feel like that they're problem solving abilities have decreased in the past year if they use it a lot. So there's always those, aspects to think about when you're thinking about adopting AI or using it or encouraging your staff to use it. Again, education, education, education is so important for everyone to know what they're getting into when they make that choice.
Absolutely. I think so. Greg Crawford, who's the president of Miami, when I was interviewing there in 2020, so this was obviously pre AI, the very last thing before I got the job offer was, would I submit a writing sample that showed how I think? Because he's such a believer in writing is thinking. And I am too. Like, if people ask me to brainstorm something verbally, I have a very different way of expressing thoughts than if I'm doing it in writing. And I gave him a chapter that I wrote for a book, and I got the job after that afternoon, which I was like, okay, so you must like my thinking. But that's like, I truly, that was the first time I was introduced, even though my whole life I had spent using writing for thinking. Like, I was an avid journaler, wrote everything all the time. That's how I form ideas. I didn't really think about it until Greg was talking about it as like writing as thought process. And it can be very dangerous to just hand that off to AI. It's a muscle. It'll atrophy without use. So don't
Absolutely.
lose that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I 100% agree.
I'm really curious because I know, because I've been on, I think I've trained, maybe a dozen campuses on how to use AI. There is always like the skeptics in the room who kind of sit with their arms crossed and, ask me questions that are designed to be kind of gotchas that AI is bad. I'm really curious what strategies are working for you all in helping team members who might have that attitude move from that skepticism or even fear. I think there's a lot of people with really valid fears toward being more curious and skill building? Or are you just saying to people, if you want to never use it and be negative about it, that's cool. You do you.
So actually, it's both. So externally, publicly, even in conversations with these people, if they say they don't support AI, they don't want to use AI, they don't want to know anything about it, or they don't think that anyone should use it, I say, okay, no one can force you to do that. And I think that everyone is empowered to make that decision. I mean, and back to my studies in AI, there are folks in my research field in rhetoric and composition who reject AI completely and have really good arguments for why they reject it, why they don't want to use it, and they don't think that it should be used. And I respect those opinions. At the same time, I've noticed I'm not pressuring anyone, but in a staff meeting, we're going to show off a tool. And especially, there was a light bulb moment with our skeptic in our AI committee. In the steering committee, we were showing off how to build a GPT. And so we were all gathered together, brainstorming what kind of GPTs might we build, how are they used. And so I said, well, I'll just build one right now. It's because if you've never built one, you guys take 10 minutes out of your day and try it. And it's very easy. It takes no programming knowledge, and it can be really helpful. And so we picked building a GPT, a custom GPT that helps folks learn Miami's editorial brand guidelines. So do we use doctor in front of a non-medical doctor? Which is a trick question at Miami, which Jamie knows, do we use Oxford commas? And it's a lot of it's AP style, which for me and probably Jamie, we learned in college because we went right into journalism, but for a lot of folks, it's foreign. But even with AP style, there's exceptions. And so I loaded during that meeting in about 10 minutes, I loaded all of our editorial policy into this GPT. And I said, okay, I'm going to take this email and copy and paste it into the GPT and ask it if it's in brand style. And it came back and it had all the right answers. And our skeptic was really impressed. And she said, you're not using it to write anything. You're not using it deceptively. You're just checking your work. And she said, make sure, as long as people know that AI lies. And I said, it's in the instructions. Every GPT that we share, it says, check everything that this GPT says, Miami does not endorse it. But Miami doesn't promise that it's always 100% accurate. But she hadn't thought of using it besides just doing work for you. A lot of folks who shy away from it, if they never use it, they don't see all of the different ways that it can be used. And so she actually, I think that she went back, and I would love to know if she has, because you can also ask it to give you a quiz on the editorial guidelines, which is really fun to play with. And I could see her going back and actually using that or recommending it to somebody to help them learn our guidelines, because it's a low risk way. It's not writing for her. It's not doing the job. And it's not, if it gets something wrong, it's only telling you as the user. And if you're checking, you go and check it as part of your study session or your learning session, it's so low risk. And so showing actual use cases and showing a variety of them, the ones that are not quite as sparkly and not the ones where it creates a whole app, a game, which, the skeptics are probably like, I don't create games. So why do I need that? But showing some little uses or, things that are more everyday and not quite as generative as, just writing something for you or creating an image for you, coupled with not pressuring anybody. Then they come to it on their own, and they might be a little bit more interested on their own. And it was completely their idea, and I had nothing to do with it. So I think that is my advice, is accept the fact that some folks are just not going to be interested, and that's okay. Truly accept it. Don't just pretend that you do. And then you're pleasantly surprised when you get somebody, when you spark an interest in someone.
I remember about a year ago, I gave a PRSA workshop on how to use ChatGPT in PR work. And it wasn't about writing. It was about, like you're saying, checking for AP style. It was about taking complicated research and helping you understand from a layman's perspective, helping you identify potential reporters to pitch things to, stuff like that. And I remember there was a woman who was in the session who messaged me through LinkedIn right after and was like, I intended to heckle you and to be like, why are we doing this? This is dumb. Why is PRSA sponsoring it? And instead I went home and started playing around with it and realized like there is value to this beyond just having it right.
First of all, it's terrifying that somebody's coming to a session with the intention to heckle you, because that's scary to me. I'm trying to do some more stuff like that. Oh man, I hope nobody ever comes to my session to heckle me. That's terrifying. But it's great. I think that's awesome that, her intention was to make a point about using AI in PR, and then she said, "Oh, actually, maybe we could."
Yeah.
Actually, it's not so generative. It's not a robot that's doing everything.
Yeah. I have a session I've given before that's like, you're using AI wrong. And maybe I need to change it to like, you're thinking about AI wrong, but it's all about like, you can use it for role playing. You can use it for brainstorming. You can use it exactly the ways that you were talking about. There's all these other ways that, you used to have to rely on the kindness of a coworker to proofread something for you. You used to have to, maybe you were working on something and you got past 5, but you needed someone to proof it before you turned it in, or fill in the blank. You need to have a difficult conversation. You want to ask for a raise, practice that with your boss. There's so much that you can do beyond just having it generate content for you. And honestly, I feel like unless you've really tuned up a GPT, the content that's created isn't that great anyway. You really need to like put a lot of training documents into it to get good content to start with.
Oh, especially you have to put a lot of training data in it, especially if you want it to sound like you, because what it spits out is the average of of every word that was ever written. Yeah. So imagine that. That's why we get it always has M dashes and emojis. Everywhere it sounds the same to everybody unless you're giving it in specific instructions.
There's always it's not just about blank, it's about blank. Like that to me, whenever I see somebody post something on LinkedIn that has that, I'm like, you use ChatGPT. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's like when I see that in student papers, I'm like, nobody talks like that. That's a ChatGPT. One of my big things that I run into when I'm giving sessions is people not necessarily understanding how much bias there is in these large language models. And one of the things I do is show them how I've used Midjourney and asked it to create an image of a doctor, and it will create, four older white men as doctors. And when I ask it to create nurses, it's four young white women as the
Mhm.
nurses. And that's just one example. It's just a really visual example. How is your team tackling concerns around bias, particularly when some of these AI tools replicate systemic inequalities?
So, oh man, I could talk about this all day. It's not just bias in the content that it creates, but you might have a really important point talking about systemic inequality. The impact that it can have on socioeconomic disparities with, people who have internet and computers are going to get richer and richer, and people who don't are going to get poorer and poorer, right? So there's all kinds of things with it. And I think, again, education is so important. I mean, I'm in a program where I keep up on this. I don't know what's going to happen when I get out of that program. I don't have to read academic articles, the latest research on it every day. Hopefully, I'll keep up on it on my own. But knowing that I understanding how the tools that we're using work, what they do, how they are biased and why they're biased and what the impact of that is, and then working to minimize that impact within your organization. So unfortunately, right now, unless somebody out there knows about a tool that I haven't found, there isn't a large language model that's as powerful as ChatGPT or Anthropic or OpenAI's or Anthropic's or Gemini's that is also intentionally being very ethical. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Anthropic is a better one, but there are smaller large language models that have been built, especially by researchers at universities. You can build one yourself on your desktop with open source software, but the capabilities of those products are no match for what you get from the big players in the field. So being aware of how you're using it and how you can minimize your impact is the most important thing. So again, we educate our staff about that. We have discussions about it and we use it very thoughtfully. When we do use it, understanding that what comes out has the potential to be biased. And if you know that, you can watch for it and try to mitigate that. Another thing that's really important is we do not use it to generate text about controversial, sensitive
Mm.
issues or any executive communications. AI doesn't touch that because of the risks involved with using a biased model for such important communication.
Mm.
So that's just another way. Having a human in the process and overseeing the machine is really important.
I think that's something that could have saved Vanderbilt from the situation that they were in. I remember that at the time, I think I was still at ODU, and you know, reading through it, but there wasn't just the problem with it being generated by AI around a sensitive topic. It was so surfacey on that topic. And it was very, like, just didn't really feel like something someone with a lived experience would have written. And it
Mhm.
didn't have any heart to it. And I think that these tools, and people ask me this a lot, is like, can these tools reflect empathy? Because that's my whole thing, is that empathy in marketing. And it can produce a facsimile of empathy, but it doesn't truly have lived experience. It doesn't truly have heart and soul. And that's the
Mhm.
part where, even if we're not talking about executive communications, but something else that needs to have an empathetic tone, you need to then still go through and put human touch on that to give it that real heart, because I think you can feel when it's not there. And that's risky. And it's not something that I feel like, particularly university presidents, to your point about executive communications, I don't think they want to get into the habit of being like, yeah, all my stuff's written by generative AI. And at some point, a student's going to say, if everything you do is done by generative AI, why are we paying you a salary? Why don't we just have ChatGPT be the president of the university?
Right.
I wouldn't be surprised to see that at some point.
I think a good rule of thumb for that is if you would be willing to sign ChatGPT on it, or a large language model produce this copy, then fine. If you feel reservations about, say, admitting that or publishing the byline being large language model or ChatGPT, then that's a sign that you shouldn't use it for that
That's a
copy.
fantastic boundary. A
Yeah.
fantastic boundary. So I would love to hear what some of your goals are for the next like 6 to 12 months for the committee.
So we are really working on building up our library. So one of the things that we've done is we've created a form where staff members can fill out a simple Asana form, which is the project management system that we use. And it just says, did you use AI? How did you use AI today? What tool did you use? How much did it cost you? Were you happy with the results? Would you do it again? And what did you learn? And then it feeds it into this spreadsheet where folks can go in and search, and they can say email, just search email and see all the ways that folks have used AI or large language models to help with some email tasks or some graphic design tasks. Or if they're looking for a tool that might help them with data, they can go in there and search for data and see, well, Zach used this for data and he hated it. So there's problems here. So let's skip that one and use this other tool that he said was really helpful. Because I think a big barrier besides not wanting to adopt and resistance, if they're not resistant, but they're still not adopting AI, it's probably because they don't know where to start. There's so many things that you can do with it, as we've said, but it becomes overwhelming when you try to think about how can I use AI? How I'd like to start using this. Everyone says that it's going to help save time, but where do I start? And so when you have those use cases that your coworkers and your counterparts have done, it helps. It can help figure out where to start. And then once you start using it, it becomes less overwhelming and less scary to
Yeah.
try to use it.
This has been such a great conversation. I want to kind of pivot just a little bit because I think a lot of the folks listening might not be in like a senior leadership position, like a VP or an AVP. And that's not where you sit in the org either, but you're still sort of spearheaded this. And I would love to hear your advice for someone who's like, I'm not at the top of the org chart. What possible chance do I have to move this forward for my organization? Like, what advice do you have for somebody who's like in a position like yours and wants to make a difference in this space?
First of all, the top people in the organization do not have time to read research about AI ethics and responsible use and look up other policies. So you're the perfect person to start thinking about this and bringing it up. So talk to your leadership about it, about your interest in it. And there's so many free webinars and professional development opportunities for folks right now to learn more about AI. So show your boss that you're making the effort to do that. And don't be intimidated. I think that those of us who are practitioners are the best people to be leading this effort because we know what tasks we're doing every single day that we could save time with AI. The VP, Jessica Rabinius at Miami, or Jamie formerly, or whoever, they're not nearly as well positioned to figure out how it can be most impactful for what you and I do every day. So I think remember that so that you don't feel like an imposter trying to lead a committee. It's not at all what it is. You are the best. If you're thinking about this and you're using it yourself and you have an interest in responsible adoption, then you are the best person to lead that committee and get the charge started. And I bet you money that if you talk to your VP or your boss's boss or whoever, they will say, well, yes, we've talked about this during leadership meetings, but nobody has time to make a policy. So that's where we come in.
I love that. I think that's fantastic advice. This has been such a fantastic conversation. My last question is, as AI is evolving constantly, how are you future proofing this approach that you're taking to steering AI for your organization?
I think the most important thing, and I sound like a broken record, education. Make sure that you are staying up on the latest, that you understand where AI is taking, how it's disrupting the workforce, and encouraging your colleagues and your team to stay up on that and understand that as well. I think you don't need to know how how to build an AI large language model or how to code. But if you have a general interest in AI and you're using it and you're practicing with it, you'll go further in your career in the next 5 years than those who don't know. So start small and just start playing with it, and you'll be leagues ahead of a lot of other folks. And your job, our jobs will change. Some jobs will go away. I think that there is truth to that. But I think that if you're the person who has embraced the disruption and gone with it and allowed it to change their day to day and practiced with it and understands how to adopt new technology and adopt to change, then you're in a position where your job will change with you, not your job. Your job won't go away. It will change with you and your skill set, and you'll have opportunities ahead of you as the workforce landscape changes.
That's so smart. That's so smart. That's such good advice. Hopefully everybody listening takes it to heart. If folks want to chat with you after this, where can they find you?
So I am on LinkedIn. You can find me there under Nikki Ferrell. And my email also is nikki.ferrell@miamioh.edu. And we'll have that in the show notes as well.
And listeners, as always, you can find me on LinkedIn at Jaime Hunt, JaimeHunt. You can also find me on my website, solvehighered.com. And you can find my book, Heart Over Hype, at heartoverhypebook.com. And I am always eager to talk to listeners, so feel free to reach out. And in the meantime, let's go bust some silos. Thanks for listening to Confessions of a Higher Ed CMO. This show is a proud member of the Enrollify Network, home to Higher Ed's largest collection of podcasts. Enrollify is where higher ed goes to grow, so be sure to check out our other podcasts, webinars, video clips, blogs, and more. Visit Enrollify.org and subscribe for all the latest details and contact drops directly to your inbox. Enrollify is brought to you by Element 451, the digital workforce platform for higher ed. Learn more at element451.com.